Story 1. I think I live there. Many people go to church, but nobody talks about it. My daughter just moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. I think the predominant religion in her area is Baptist. She cannot have a conversation with anyone without them talking about all the miracles they have experienced lately. She is finding it difficult to have a rational conversation there. Story 2. My concern with rural living is that it takes an hour for a round trip to get a latte or do anything else. Therefore, I have to decline. I need to be no more than 15 minutes away from a bookstore, pizza, and beer. Story 3. I live in a small rural town that is technically conservative. As long as I have lived here, I have not heard anyone talk about politics. I can think of 2 houses and 1 car that have Donald Trump signs. I moved here from Miami where it was technically liberal, but there were so many right-wing extremists it was annoying on a daily basis. Story 4. It is basically where I live. I think most people are either Protestant or non-religious. I am the Catholic person, though. I will be at confession tomorrow and Mass on Sunday. One fun thing is my good friend converted. I just talked about my theology, and he decided to follow it. So we are just friends having fun on Sunday with my children. Story 5. I have traveled a lot and discovered that I like big cities because people are generally more educated and open-minded. But I dislike how impersonal and transactional people are with each other. I like small towns because everyone is generally kinder to each other and more open to engaging with strangers, but I dislike how closed-minded and uneducated people generally are. Religion is not so important to me, but my ideal dream home would be a rural lake town full of diverse, educated people. Story 6. I would much rather live in a small rural town where people are helpful and kind than in a town where everyone says they are religious yet are bigots and judgmental. Story 7. Love rural towns but have no preference regarding people's religion or lack thereof. I am an atheist myself, but churches provide social cohesion for many in rural areas, which benefits the entire community in various ways. Story 8. I have lived in a rural town, and the only problem was that there was no electricity there. I could not go back now. Story 9. Here in Britain, that is not even unheard of and is actually normal. To be honest, though, it really is not too different from living in a Christian-majority rural town either, since I would wager that a lot of Christians in the United Kingdom are not practicing and are more so cultural Christians. Story 10. I'm too much of a city boy to really enjoy rural living. But the appeal of not having to brace yourself when explaining you are an atheist is not zero. Story 11. Sounds great to me. There was a pretty cool little town outside of Seattle between the city and the mountain that I thought was really nice. I would enjoy living there. Story 12. As someone who was raised Christian and has also heard how some highly religious content creators are, it does not sound that bad to live in a town where the majority are non-religious. It sounds like a nice break from all the negative things I have had to hear for years. Story 13. Considering that our village has about 1,000 residents and 5 of them attend the monthly service, I would say I quite like it. Not that I am against religion, but in the past it would have been impossible to integrate here without attending church. P.S. I believe you will find the same all over Europe, so if this is what you are after. Story 14. I do and I love it. It is great. Everyone is open to hearing differing opinions and reasonable discussion about anything. There is almost no homophobia or racism that I have seen. Full disclosure, I feel like I know my community members well enough to make that claim, but as a heterosexual white woman, I am not exactly prime discrimination material either. Story 15. I would rather live in a town where everyone is accepted. Why would I care about someone else's religion? Story 16. Would love it, relatively near, say 60 to 70 miles, a larger town or small city where more services are an option. However, we have small-town charm items like a local grocer, a diner, and the hardware store that surprisingly has everything. Story 17. I don't care either way. I don't go, and if they wish to go, it is their business. I don't tell people who or what to worship unless it directly affects me. The people with the false orange god directly affect me, so I find them bad. Story 18. I would like to live in a rural town regardless. As long as it is not a cult, I do not care what they are doing. Story 19. I live in a rural area already, so it sounds like an upgrade. How rural are we talking? I live about 1.5 hours from the nearest big city, so getting out to do cool activities is a bit tedious. There are several small towns nearby with basic fast food options and Walmart close by. I would not do it if I were more than 15 minutes from any food options or groceries, but if I could easily get what I need nearby and be within 2 hours of a city, then definitely sign me up. Story 20. Swap out smallish city in the south and I'm all for it. If it exists, somebody please let me know. As a man who was born and raised in North Carolina, it still cracks me up the crazy looks I get when people find out I am not religious. Story 21. I have no idea which, if any, of my rural neighbors go to church. For that matter, I have no idea where the nearest churches are. Story 22. It could be peaceful and open-minded depending on the community's values and respect for differences. Story 23. That would be so nice. It does not even have to be non-religious, just a place where there are not the type of Christians that guilt you into going to church with them every single Sunday and constantly try to convert you. Story 24. I do not care if they are religious or not. I live in a rural town. The other residents' religious beliefs have no effect on me whatsoever. Story 25. I have almost exclusively lived in non-religious rural towns. Is this an American phenomenon? People really need to get out of their bubbles. Story 26. I live in the only non-religious majority region in North America. It is wonderful. I would not live anywhere that was majority religious. Story 27. Where do I sign up? I think I can get my house moved as a single piece if I take out a loan. What is the time frame? I have an event next weekend, but I am free after that. Story 28. As a non-religious, progressive leftist living in a rural area where 90% of the population are Southern Baptist, it is hard to understand. Story 29. I would love to live there because religious beliefs bring many rules that you must follow to be a good person. These rules do not have anything to do with religion but are social norms created around perceived good and bad. Story 30. I do not really want to live in a rural area, but I would choose a non-religious rural area over a religious one any day of the week and twice on Sundays. Story 31. America is non-religious. Give me a break. All of America worships money. I have been to India and spent some time there. Never have I been to a place more religious. Story 32. I lived in 3 different rural areas at various points in my life. I do not care about their religion, but access to anything was a massive burden. It was also very boring. Story 33. I like the city very much, but depending on the cost and location, it might be enjoyable as a summer or winter home. Story 34. My 2 top complaints about where I live are the religious zealots and conservatives. I imagine the non-religious handle the latter as well. Story 35. Many rural areas in California are religious and conservative, but you can likely find a different atmosphere in Humboldt County. There are many hippies there. Story 36. That's pretty much where I live in rural Canada, potato farm country. About 250 people, a mix of religious folks who are pretty chill and others who are agnostic. Everybody is nice but a little on the old school conservative side. There is ethnic diversity and a thriving hockey stadium. Story 37. I would say my rural town is about 40% religious, so I meet this criteria. That would be for the traditional religions. We are very religious when it comes to high school football. My taxes keep going up because they need a large video screen in the stadium. For real, we have like a professional stadium for high school football. It is insane. Story 38. It's great. I moved to Vermont indirectly because of this reason. Vermont is often ranked as one of the least religious states in the United States. We are also one of the most educated and score near the top on many quality of life and health rankings. Go figure. Story 39. Having a house there as a vacation home would be fine now, and possibly living there for most of the year after retirement. Story 40. Sounds like a good start. We will need them to also not be political extremists. It has to be affordable, so the chances are probably low. Story 41. Depends on what we are calling rural, but that is basically where I have always lived. So yes, I will continue to live in small towns in the Northeast United States. Story 42. I would be very happy, especially if the old church buildings were repurposed into restaurants and coffee houses. Story 43. My dream is a rural liberal town in a blue state with good Wi-Fi, lower cost of living, in the middle of a forest, and warm or temperate winters. I would move there in a heartbeat. Story 44. The majority of people claiming to be religious live like atheists, so it would not be much different from any other town in the United States. Story 45. Not loving the idea of a rural town since I like having amenities nearby, but I would take it if it meant the majority of the people around me were not dangerous or likely to harm children. Story 46. Not a chance. It is not for me. I enjoy being able to walk down the street and get a coffee instead of having to drive 30 minutes for it. I have spent plenty of time with rural family, and I do not see what benefits rural living would provide for me. Nature, I guess, but public. Parks are more than enough for me most of the time. When they are not, it is not hard to find a rural area nearby and spend a day out there before coming back to my city comforts. I do not even live in a huge city, but having easy access to basic amenities is just too much to give up. Story 47, just like anywhere else, probably. I would manage to find my people and make a life for myself. I would not agree with the majority, but that is kind of my situation now. Once again, I would find my people. Story 48. I would hate it. Sure, the neighbors would be awesome, but that kind of neighborhood would be constantly targeted by door-to-door Bible pushers trying to indoctrinate them into their cult. One of the benefits of living in a ridiculously small town where 95% of the less than 2,000 population is religious is that they just assume everyone already is and do not come knocking. Story 49. I've done it. It has its perks. Rural living was peaceful. I enjoyed it as long as I did not have appointments or places I needed to go. Story 50. How rural? Like Hallmark rural, a cool small-town neighborhood with all the essentials right there? Or real life where it is at least a 15-minute drive to see a movie or go to a restaurant? Story 51. No. I like living in the suburbs because I am not too close to other people, but there are still plenty of stores and restaurants nearby. I also like having easy access to many doctors and hospitals because I have health issues. On the other end of the spectrum, I would never live in a city because it is too crowded and loud. I live in the suburbs of a major city and am happy with it. Story 52. I would still miss the kind of specialty items you can only find in cities, such as interesting and unique stores and restaurants, as well as more choices for clubs and social events. However, it would be nice to live somewhere quiet, close-knit, and close to nature without having to fear being harmed. Story 53. You would find something like this in Japan. Some towns there live just by manners, no religion, just people with good manners minding their own business in the countryside and small towns. Story 54. I live in a rural area with churches that people attend, but we are civilized, and no one generally cares about religion in the United Kingdom. We have a masterpiece of a church locally that I direct tourists to, not for religious reasons but for the architecture. It is 179 years old and stunning. Thankfully, the person who was a priest when I was young is still in prison, I believe. Story 55. As long as they let me practice my religion, I don't really care what theirs is. Rural sounds nice, though. Story 56. The majority of the United Kingdom is non-religious, for which I am very grateful. I would hate to live in a religious town. Story 57. I do not understand the question. That would be great. I recently moved to a rural town, and everyone has been great so far. There are about 8 churches for fewer than 800 people. Story 58. I do. Most of the former churches now house businesses such as landscapers and garden supply stores. It is great. Story 59. I am a conservative Christian. I would be lonely if there were not more people like me. Most of my friends are from church, although my best friend does not go to church. Story 60. I do, and it is excellent. There is a church near the center of town, but they really keep to themselves. Story 61. Many college towns are like this, such as Athens, Ohio. It is not tiny, but Asheville, North Carolina is very similar. Story 62. It would be peaceful most likely. Small, isolated towns occasionally change their religious practices into unpleasant extremes. Story 63. I would love it. Luckily, here in Canada, there are not too many religious extremists, so most rural towns are fine. Story 64. It is okay. I have been living in lower-tier cities my whole life, and my heart is craving the high-rise skyline. Story 65. Why are you offering? I'd be interested, I think, depending on how rural the area is. If there is no grocery store for 100 miles, I am less interested. Story 66. I already do. I live in a rural town in Quebec, Canada. We do not have a church anymore because no one would go. Story 67. I would move back home to Indiana where my family is. I miss them, but I am gay and never felt like I belonged when I lived in Indiana. Story 68. I like it. I have been here for 22 or 23 years in a town of 6,000 people. The other town in this county has 3,500. About 92% of the land in the county is public land. We have friendly neighbors, many volunteers, a very active Habitat for Humanity and Boys and Girls Club, a performing arts center, and a couple dozen restaurants and hotels. There are many artist-owned galleries downtown, a family-friendly ski area, and the most rafted river in North America runs through town, across the street from my house. It is expensive now, which is unfortunate, but less than most ski towns in Colorado. House prices have been dropping about 10% a year for almost 3 years. Property tax is low. Our hospital grows every year, and the campus was first built about 15 years ago. There are many mountain bike and hiking trails in and around town. It is 3 hours to Denver International Airport, 2.5 hours to most parts of Denver, and 2 hours to Colorado Springs. It is pretty hard to find work outside the hospital, banks, restaurants, and seasonal rafting guide and ski area jobs. Many people here now work remotely or are retired. Story 69. Unless you count hockey teams as a religion, I already do, although our definitions of rural may differ. Story 70. I grew up in a place like this. It was basically a logging town with a few farms. People were mostly non-religious, with a fundamentalist minority. The ratios completely changed after the early 2000s when the timber industry faltered and the older loggers passed away. I do not go there anymore. Story 71. It is still very boring. Everything is closed by the time I get off work, and most businesses are permanently closed by the time I get a chance to stop inside. There is nothing to do, and I have to drive far to find reasonably priced groceries. Story 72. I basically did that at one point in life. It made it very clear to me that no, I am a city person. Give me a giant busy city, and I am much happier. Story 73. Doesn't matter where you go now, man. There will be migrants there doing their thing. The world is messed up. Story 74. My town has a population of 800. There are only 2 churches. Most people attending church are over 60 years old along with their grandchildren. Story 75. As long as people are kind and respectful, I wouldn't mind it at all. I prefer peace over preaching, to be honest. Story 76. It's never been about religion. I know plenty of unpleasant, backward towns that aren't religious. You mean not full of unpleasant, backward people? Yes, definitely. Story 77. I would like to be within an hour of a major city. I do not mind if most of my neighbors are not religious, but I am religious myself, so I would like there to be a healthy church community for me and my family to be a part of. Story 78. Sounds pretty awesome, actually. Christians mostly do not behave well. If you take offense with this comment as a Christian, then maybe you should have some talks with others in your congregation or look at yourself. Story 79. Rural, non-religious, and apolitical. You can sign me up right now. The only religion and politics I want is friendly arguments over sports teams. Story 80. Isn't there a town like that somewhere in the United States, where no one is religious but everyone is a racist? Story 81. If you find it, tell me. We can go there. We can build walls and do science. We can breathe deeply and love one another. It will feel like we all won the contest. We will mourn the wasted years but be happy we are not wasting them any longer. We will keep an eye out for anyone who writes a science fiction novel and be sure it does not get out of hand. Story 82. I grew up in a rural town where Catholicism was the major religion, but it felt like no one really practiced it the way many religious towns did. It seemed like a secondary aspect of life where I lived. The only ones who truly practiced were the Russian Orthodox. They were somewhat different. I suppose I grew up in a non-religious town based on how people treated religion. It was nice, just a community of good people. Story 83. I had an uncle who did that in the 1960s, and he was a hippie. These days, I guess people call it a cult. They thought they were creating an idyllic place, heaven on earth, but it does not work out like that. Story 84. It is interesting how often questions appear that make you think the poster must be in either Pakistan or the United States of America. Story 85. Northwestern Germany's rural areas can be summarized as challenging. I grew up in such a town and I hated it. I am not made for rural places. I do not have a driver's license, and I cannot learn to drive because I rely on medication that has a strong warning not to operate any type of vehicle while taking it. I cannot afford a car, and I prefer the convenience of living in a larger city with reliable and frequent public transportation rather than a village in a remote area that at most has a bakery and post office. The bus comes only once per hour on weekdays, stops running after 8 p.m., and it takes a long time to get to a larger town. For visiting, it is fine. For living, absolutely not. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.